Let's just think about this for a second. Over half of American kids are sick with a chronic condition, and you heard me out there defining on the steps what a chronic condition was, right? It's a situation where you've had a health issue for more than 3 months and that there's no cure. That's what a chronic health condition is. We spend the least on food, the most on health care, give the highest number of vaccines, and have the sickest kids of any industrialized country. So I'm saying, what are we doing? If every pediatrician is not here knocking on these legislators' doors, then I don't know what's going on. Well, I can tell you where they are. They're in their practices seeing kids 1 every 10 minutes, 1 every 15 minutes, and I'm going to tell you, in defense of the pediatricians, I'm one, that you really can't get into this stuff when you're seeing kids every 10 to 15 minutes. It's impossible, and that's what your schedule looks like. 1 every 15 minutes, that's what we're doing. Are you going to get into all this? Wow. It's really hard. So that's why it's really up to make some of these changes. After the end of these talks, you're going to know more than your pediatrician. So what happened to me? And I want to share what happened to me because it can happen to you. And I think I'm really preaching to the choir, to this group, but maybe to not to some of our legislators. When I read Jeffrey's book, I never heard of this guy. But Jeffrey, on page 16, started talking about Dr. Arpad Pusztai. And so I had to read about Arpad Pusztai. He's Hungarian. I'm married to a Hungarian. My mother-in-law was so happy when I started talking about him. And so what I learned from Arpad is that, well, wait a second. This guy was studying genetically modified potatoes in 1996, almost 22 years ago. And he was the first one to look at this problem of genetically modified food. So why am I talking about GM food? We're talking about glyphosate. Is because they're linked. Herbicide-tolerant crops were developed so we can spray more Roundup or more glyphosate. And what Arpad found, and I'm going to show this histopathology slide, you're not medical professionals, you're not med students, but you're not a bunch of dummies. We're going to elevate this conversation. This is what he saw. And when I saw these slides, I went, you've got to be kidding me. Why didn't anybody tell me this? Jeffrey Smith told me, and this is what I saw. When Arpad fed these rats genetically modified potatoes, and then he looked at the GM-fed rats and the non-GM-fed rats, he saw that the intestinal wall villi were abnormal. Now I'm saying, wait a minute, those are the little finger-like projections lining your gut, and that's where the absorption of all your nutrient happens. So you mean to tell me we have destruction of the gut of those rats that ate the GM potatoes? Is that what's causing leaky gut? The one that I'm telling you that I'm seeing in just about every one of your kids, and mine too. What he also found was in the stomach lining of those rats that they had increased cell growth. That's called hyperplasia. Well, why is that important? Hyperplasia is the precursor to dysplasia. Did you all hear my New York accent? Yeah, right. Hyperplasia. I'll spare you. I won't go to. Maybe I should go to New York, are you? Can I talk like I'm from New York? So look what he found. There's all this hyperplasia, precursor to dysplasia, precursor to cancer. And was this the cancerous precursor that we were seeing from the genetic modified process? Possibly. That's what he found. So let me switch gears a little bit. So if you have an herbicide-tolerant plant that's genetically modified, then you're spraying a lot of glyphosate on it. They're linked. Which one's causing what? I'm not sure. I don't know. I'm really not sure. If you said, is it the GM process? Is it the glyphosate? It's likely both. And Sarah Leaney actually took a look at that. So what I try to do is say, why is this stuff not so good? No way, no. Why do I say that? Glyphosate, it's a chelator. You heard Howard talk about that. It binds micronutrients, and it's likely doing it in our kids. So how do I know that glyphosate is binding minerals in our kids? I don't know. All I know is they're eating it. I check their nutrient levels, and they're low. I fix their diets, and it goes up. Oh, come on, people, this is not hard, right? This is like common sense. You know, you could all be clinicians and practitioners here. So and I gave you a study here, just so you know, because everybody wants data. I'm giving you data. Clinical correlation, nutrient deficiencies in kids, magnesium, zinc, are associated with learning disorders, ADHD, insomnia, mood disturbances, etc. Glyphosate is a carcinogen. You heard that. You heard the World Health Organization, the IARC. They did the studies in animals. It's really hard to study humans. And they found that it's a carcinogen class 2A. It would be a class 1 if it was studied in humans. And actually, when Monsanto first brought this stuff to the EPA back in 1983, they found renal cell tubular adenomas in kidneys in rats fed glyphosate, by the way. So Monsanto's known this a long time, that there's carcinogenic potential. And they looked at those slides, and then they found another group of pathologists to look at the slides, and then the data kind of morphed. I think you're kind of getting a theme here on how data can change. Depends on who's looking at it. Glyphosate is an antibiotic. I mean, if Howard's stuff isn't convincing enough, what the cutting edge of research now is the effect of glyphosate on the microbiome and how that changes. Now, how do I know? Because I check kids' microbiome. I do something called PCR testing. I can order a test. It's not in regular conventional medicine. It's in one of the tools of integrative doctors or functional medicine doctors. We can do a test through Genova. I'm not plugging Genova, but that's where I order it. It's $134 if you have a PPO insurance. I can map out the entire microbiome of a kid and look at it. And what I find is disturbing. They have very few amounts of microbiome. Their levels are low, and they have an abnormal distribution of the microbiome. And depending on what issue they have, you'll find abnormalities such as kids on the spectrum will have high levels of certain Clostridial species, or you'll see lots of strep species in kids who have pandas, or other opportunistic players. Remember, most of that bacteria are in your gut or are going to take over if they get a chance. They're not little happy bacteria here to help you. They're going to go over. And so when those lactobacilli and bifidobacteria are abnormal because they're killed off, like in Monica's study, all the bad players party. And that's what happens. And you see it. And when you make corrections, kids get better. How do I know? Well, for one, they're better. I asked the mom, how's Johnny? He's better. How's his stomach ache? Gone. Is he pooping? Yes. The constipation resolved. I'm going to retire on constipation. I treat constipation all day long. They're all constipated, digestive enzymes, better. Because we're checking the stool. We're doing analyses. Why do I do those analyses? Mom's report could be enough, by the way, but dads want data. You have to show those dads that data. They want to see it. Men want to see science. So, gosh darn it, I'm going to show them science. So, it's an antibiotic. Another good study about, this one is just off the press, and it shows an explanation for antibiotic resistance.
I have a question. Is it okay to ask a question right now?
Can we do afterwards?
Oh, afterwards.
Can you save it? Will you remember it?
I'll remember it.
Try to remember. Thank you. Let me move on. It inhibits a pathway in plants, the shikimate pathway. Is a pathway responsible for producing certain neurochemicals, and it uses and it blocks the production of a certain group of amino acids called aromatic amino acids. And we were told that glyphosate wasn't harmful to humans because we don't have a shikimate pathway. And we don't. Humans don't have it, but our microbiome does. And that's key. It's another thing. So, what happens is the aromatics get blocked. Those aromatic amino acids, building blocks of protein, kids can't make neurotransmitters. Is that what's happening? I'm guessing. I don't know. Why don't I know? Because there are no studies. And glyphosate use is discriminatory. This is the last point I want to make. California's poorest counties have the highest application of glyphosate. And they are Tulare, Fresno, Merced, Del Norte, Madera, Lake, Imperial, Kern, and they're all part of the southern part of the Central Valley. And populations in these areas are mostly Latino. So our Latino kids are getting the most spraying involved. And this has been shown to be seen in Salinas Valley too, near Santa Cruz. And those kids have been studied for 19 years out of UC Berkeley. And those kids who are also heavily sprayed with organophosphates, which is not glyphosate, but glyphosate is a type of organophosphate, those kids have been shown to have some of the highest rates of ADHD. And my colleagues who work at UCSF with pediatricians have told me informally and anecdotally that when kids come in with severe ADHD, they say, yeah, they're probably from Salinas. That's how it's become. So I just want to wrap up by saying there's no doubt in the science that kids are tremendously affected by glyphosate and the genetic modification process. This is a no-brainer for me as a clinician to remove toxicants and toxins out of our children's environments. I believe that this is just, as Kathleen Halal said, it's just common sense. Thank you.
Now, if I could introduce Jeffrey Smith, who is named as Person of the Year by Masters of Health magazine. He's the founder of the Institute for Responsible Technology. He's an author, a filmmaker. He had a laundromat before he did all this.
I did? I guess I did.
Anyway, most of us know Jeffrey Smith. Jeffrey.
I like to use the microphone. Thank you. We are seeing a pattern here in the glyphosate and GMO world that we've seen with lead, that we've seen with tobacco, that we continue to see over and over again. There's a certain game that gets played where they throw their experts, Bobby Kennedy calls them cyostitutes, and they throw rigged research and corrupt data, and they also have very heavy lobbying influence in places like this, in order to try and convince that there's no, that our science is wrong, and that their science is right, and that there is no problem. And so I have been fortunate enough to be traveling around the world on the GMO issue, which includes the glyphosate issue, and I have seen how Monsanto captures regulatory agencies and governments. I've been to 45 countries working in this area, and the activists will explain which person in government is the captured regulator or the captured minister or the ministry is taken over. And then I see in their rhetoric Monsanto's words. They captured the European Food Safety Authority, and they actually, EFSA, which is their version of the FDA, they literally cut and paste Monsanto's statements as their own. And maybe change a few words here and there. They've actually been charged with plagiarism. Not by Monsanto, by the public. So what I want to do is talk about how they're trying to defend against the World Health Organization's declaration that glyphosate is a class 2A carcinogen, which they said it definitely causes cancer in animals, it definitely causes mutations in human DNA, and where it is sprayed, there's higher concentrations of cancer. So it's also declared a carcinogen by the California government. And in France, they wanted to ban it. They're going to ban it completely in a few years. So these are, I don't know if you can see, I'm going to move myself so I can actually read them. So I'm going to leave the microphone for a minute. So this is liver and bile duct cancer incidence. And it's related to, thank you, my esteemed assistant. Thank you, Michelle. So this is a correlation. And I have to say that whenever I show slides of correlation, we have to put it into context. The fact that the line that is blue or purple, which is the amount of glyphosate applied to genetically engineered soy and corn, the fact that it is related to the increase of this cancer does not mean that it causes it. It's correlation, it's not causation. However, when you're looking at from an epidemiological standpoint and you have probable causation because you understand the mechanics that glyphosate causes problems in human DNA, oxidative stress, etc., and then you also see these epidemiological statistics, then that gives you a bigger picture. It gives you more data points from which to evaluate. So it is not irrelevant. It is just on its own, not causation. But I think it's relevant because if glyphosate is a probable human carcinogen, we probably should see some type of correlation. And here we see a correlation between liver and bile duct cancer. And here we have kidney and renal pelvic cancer. And here we have kidney and bladder cancer incidence. And here we have thyroid cancer. And here we have deaths due to myeloid leukemia. And this is discharges of breast cancer. In Argentina, they went house by house in an area that was of a city that was closer to the soybean fields. And they found disease in nearly every house. They found a tremendous increase, and respondents said got better when they switched to non-GMO and largely organic diets.
Yes.
So in that paper, I look not just at the carcinogenicity of glyphosate, but also the fact that it is a chelator, an antibiotic, it's linked to birth defects, that it's a mitochondrial toxin, and a number of other attributes of glyphosate, as well as the GMO disruption, as well as the Bt toxin. But let's take a look at some of the other correlational graphs. The correlations between glyphosate use on GMOs and other diseases. Again, we want to caution. These do not mean that glyphosate is the cause. But I want you to see that if it is a cause, and that we can look scientifically and say, yes, there's reasons why we can say that glyphosate is likely promoting that particular disease because it has this particular mode of action at the gut, at the microbiome level, at the cellular level, etc. If you look at this and realize if glyphosate was responsible for 50%, 25%, even 10% of the damage that you're going to see in these slides, you realize it needs to be banned. And children are most at risk, and so we propose that it's banned initially or in the schools, daycare centers, and also parks. So this is hospital discharge of inflammatory bowel disease. The red is the glyphosate, the bars are the discharge of inflammatory bowel disease. This is deaths due to intestinal infection. I'm just going to move through these quickly. Acute kidney failure, deaths. ADHD. Anxiety. Schizophrenia. Autism prevalence for 6-year-olds. This is, if a correlation were exact, if the R value would be 1. This is 0.9972. Diabetes. Stroke deaths. Deaths due to senile dementia. Deaths due to Alzheimer's. Deaths from Parkinson's disease. Deaths due to obesity. Deaths due to high blood pressure. Anemia. Dementia. Insomnia. Each one of these we could take time and analyze. Insomnia, melatonin. People take melatonin at night to go to sleep. Serotonin, precursor to melatonin. Serotonin may be damaged because of the consumption of glyphosate. We can track these possible lines of causality. And we have enough information, not just in the animal feeding studies, but in the clinical experience of Dr. Perot and thousands of physicians and healthcare practitioners who are prescribing non-GMO diets. Their experience, the 3,256 people, the 150 lectures where I asked audience members what they got better from, we can see that there is a problem here. And we can track that glyphosate is probably a major contributor to that. And if you look at the animal feeding studies on animals exposed to glyphosate, you can see precursors or exacerbations of these same type of problems. We do not need to wait for more science to take reasonable steps. And the reasonable steps right now, it's too late to protect from the beginning this next generation. We need to rush like crazy to try and bring them back to a state of health. I've asked Dr. Perot and I've asked others, what's changed since the mid-90s when glyphosate started to increase 15-fold, when GMOs were introduced, etc., when the amount of glyphosate in our urine jumped by 13-fold since 1993. What's happened? And it's the same story every time, in children especially, and also in pets, and also in livestock. So what we propose, and we're going to take questions in a moment, what we propose is that we protect as much as possible from every different angle the next generation. And what the proposal is for today, in front of, laying before the feet of our leaders, of our political leaders who serve us, let's protect the children from the spraying of glyphosate, where they're at school for hours a day, or at daycare centers, or where they roll on the ground and play sports in parks, and where the dogs roll around in the parks and get pet by the kids and their hands go in their mouth. Let's be reasonable. Let's protect the future generation so that we do not continue with this disaster. Thank you very much.
Dr. Vera and Howard, would you please come up and join our panel? And at this time, we'll take questions, and if you have a specific question for a specific speaker, then please ask it by name. Marianne?
I'm just wondering if the hands of the medical establishment are completely tied, because why is it that we're not doing, when a child comes in with cancer, we're not looking at levels of glyphosate in the tumor, in the child's blood supply? I mean, as a causative agent, and just from a point of view of like helping the child to heal, I mean, wouldn't it be a good idea if we could say to parents, as you have found maybe, that if you change the diet, you can heal the child, even when a child has cancer? Wouldn't it be a good idea to put them on an organic diet? Why then are we just banning them with carcinogens before we know anything about costs? I don't get it.
Yeah, it's a good question. I think to understand, things change slowly in conventional medicine, for sure. And in medical schools, it's still a pharmaceutical approach. Medical students receive a year of pharmacology. Maybe now it's up to 2 weeks of nutrition. And integrative medicine is only being offered in a few medical schools as an elective, and not necessarily as a mandatory requirement. So, but it is starting, the dialogue is starting to change, whether for other healing modalities. You also, can you all hear me? Need me on the mic? Is mic me up?
Yes.
Mic it up, okay. So the other thing to remember is that at the early part of the 1900s, when integrative medicine and holistic medicine was a huge part of the repertoire of clinicians, not just MDs, but of clinicians such as, you know, chiropractic care, homeopathy, herbal, and other types of medicine, there was a huge push by Rockefeller and others with pharmaceutical companies to ban that type of treatment. It was called the Flexner Report. And so that type of treatment went underground. And we are still locked to a degree in that type of training, that type of treatment, that pharmaceutical-based treatment. I think we needed to find a place to put products left over from the oil industry. And that's, I think we're still living in part, that part of it. We also can't forget the huge effect and influence of big pharma on medical schools and medical education. And they have a huge influence as well. Also, holistic treatments are also very affordable and low cost compared to pharmaceuticals. Pharmaceutical industries don't often have a lot of incentive to get people off their medications or drugs because they make money for every pill you take. So the incentive to get people off drugs is often lower. So I think that plays into it. And so, but it's starting to change. It is starting to change. It's not happening fast enough because you heard of the epidemic that we're in. So it needs to happen a little bit faster. Sorry for a long answer, but that's where we're at.
Another question.
Yeah, I'm curious, just in general, if there's anyone in this room who's from either a staffer or a congressperson in the California legislature, since that was the purpose of this, I thought.
There was one, but he left.
Is there anybody here?
There was one, but he
There was
left early.
one? Do we know? Okay, so I'm just really sad.
What
that-
your audience was.
Yeah, because you
It's
guys are
us.
preaching to the choir here, and we need to be preaching to the legend. How do we make that happen?
But something, a comment that was made outside, and I should have said something earlier about this.
Mike, please.
Thank you. Preaching to the choir. I have never listened to a speaker on this subject, whether it be Jeffrey, Dr. Perro, Dr. Huber, Dr. MacNeill, how many others that I'm privileged to work with. I always go away with something.
Oh, well, yeah, I'm not saying we're not going away with anything. I'm just saying. You never hear it.
You are all speakers. You're all presenters in whatever size way it becomes. Because that's how we've been continuing to win this battle and continuing to gain the momentum. It's one person at a time that we have to continue to spread the message.
Another question?
This is a legal question. Courts have taken a look at this issue, and Monsanto has been taken to court. In fact, there are a couple lawsuits that were filed about GMOs. And my question is, actually it's twofold. How has it been gone? In a book I'm reading now called, it's called Roundup, Making You Sicker Than You Think. They talked about a court case in here about how these farmers tried to sue to stop this, and then they turned around and sued them. And what is the possibilities that we could win in court? We could possibly win in court and stop this.
It's an interesting angle. If, as an activist, we look at all the different ways. Do you do research, legislation,
We're a law.
litigation, education? Now, with litigation, it's a crapshoot. You don't really know. A friend of mine filed a class action against Monsanto, and the class action was turned down. And the New York Times later reported that that particular judge used to be a lawyer for Monsanto. He never made that public when he made his ruling, and he never recused himself. Clarence Thomas used to be a Monsanto attorney, and he wrote the majority opinion on a decision that favored Monsanto. It's hard to say whether we can win or not. The advantage of the law is that it can affect huge change very quickly. Once it's decided, the disadvantage, it can take years, cost lots of money, and if you lose, you end up impoverished with no incremental gain.
Right.
So because there's class actions representing now in terms of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and there's now new information showing a very tight correlation with acute myeloid leukemia, not just correlation, but also causative pathways, and that could provide another avenue. So I think that there is a possibility that these major lawsuits will take a big toll out of the pocketbooks of these companies, but there's no way to tell in advance.
My follow-up question is, since it's caused all these health issues that you said with children, have parents gotten a hold of other parental organizations and said, education organizations, and come forth and said that these are hurting our children and our future generations?
Yeah, good question. And the answer is yes. There are moms groups that are forming. We have one in Marin County, Moms Advocating Sustainability. There is one from Kathleen Halal's neck of the woods, Moms Across America, that she was co-founder with a gal named Zen Honeycutt. So there are many groups that are forming. There are other moms groups that are in local counties and municipalities. Those are better, well-known groups. But some of these things, what we're doing is, what I have focused on is going mom hand-to-hand combat. And you say, hey, what about the dads? Men are involved too. And I don't mean that, but I have to tell you, in my practice, in my clinic, I didn't rarely see dads, almost never. Perhaps the way our society's set up, dads are working, moms are bringing the kids in, but it seems that moms were particularly concerned, and that's who I went after, because moms spend 85% of the household budgets. So I heard Jeffrey talk about tipping points in the past, financial tipping points, and that's what we have focused on, that if we can get moms to create shopping and create these tipping points of what we're buying. I can tell you, I spend all the money in my house, ask my husband. And if we change that, then we create a tipping point. So I think it's going to be, we're sitting here in the Capitol, but I really think it's going to be up to us. So regarding your question earlier, your question, yes, we need our legislators to give us the tools, but we can do the ground-to-ground work now, and I think we can do it. And that's why we're here.
And I can just add to that, you know, I look at the faces today, and a lot of you are already guild members. If you're not a member of the California Guild, I'll put some business cards out on this table here. Please pick it up and join us, because we're all working together on this. Another question.
Doctor, I've been puzzled for a while. I've known about the PCRSA and its use in criminal law, and they could take a molecule and duplicate a billion copies in an afternoon. If your DNA is found on a crime scene, you're going to jail. Okay. What the FDA said that wasn't supposed to exist after digestion is being found in our bodies. As far as using the assay for establishing nutrient content of foods before and after, is this something that we can pursue in a good way? I mean, I know that tests are designed in the industry to not find a problem, and that's the problem with the animal testing and that, but we're moving on to seeing we're kind of in a petri dish mode, but why is not the PCRSA used for our benefit now, for more?
Well, it's a good question. So those PCR tests and look at the microbiome is now being offered to individuals. There's the Human Genome Report, for example. There's something called uBiome, where you can get your stool tested and look at the microbiome. So it's just starting to hit the airwaves. It seems as though integrative practitioners, whether we're acupuncturists or clinicians or physicians, have been embracing some of the newer technology quicker, and conventional medicine is a little slower. But it is happening, and we're just starting to look at it, those PCRs. Those PCRs are interesting because they only show you what bacteria or organisms are present, not exactly if they're functional, alive, or what they're actually doing. But to remember is we use as clinicians lab tests as guides, not absolutes. What's most important are your clinical symptoms and what we're finding. And so with the lab tests as guides, we can use that to guide us in treatment. A lot of this microbiome stuff is new. And when I prescribe probiotics, half the time I don't really know what I'm doing. Yeah, you say, what? She's prescribed to know what she's doing. I don't know. I'm giving you 25 billion colonies of something, and I'm trying to rebalance your microbiome. And if you thought I had all the understanding whether that's going to work, I try it and I see. So sometimes we're not always sure, and this is really cutting-edge stuff.
Okay.
And it's happening and it's changing, but it's not yet cemented in, and I think it's going to happen.
Okay, but how about if you're looking at nutrient content, right? You can find out how much of a product is still there before and after.
Like looking at specific nutrients?
Yeah, it's about looking at a specific metal that's found.
Yeah, you can measure those.
Before and after.
Your physician can measure those nutrients in your body.
But as far as having a crop, and so you say, okay, this is organic, so we're looking to move forward and to really prove a point here. So we are there studies that at our hand that we have that's showing the difference before and after in a way whether you eat conventional foods?
In people or in animals? Because in people there's some and not much, but in animals I think there's more literature. Howard?
Well, the thing I was going to address is because of the chelation effect of glyphosate,
Yeah.
you can do an analysis on a crop or a feedstuff, forage, whatever the case may be, look at the nutrient density, and it will appear that the nutrition is there, but it's biounavailable if glyphosate is present. And it only takes, in the research on plants, where they looked at nutrient uptake, it took 1/40th of the label rate of glyphosate to chelate many of the micronutrients. So it's a very minuscule amount to make that bio unavailable. So it's there, but you can't use it.
But it would still show up as there, but you can't use it. So that's what you're saying.
They're working on a new methodology in testing to where they can hopefully be able to determine the availability of what's there, and that's directly because of the presence of glyphosate.
there's actually in two things. One, the translocation of the minerals through the plant is reduced. It also kills the beneficial bacteria in the soil, which help turn the unassimilable minerals into something that the plant can assimilate. So there will be less minerals in the plant, and as Howard said, even if they're there, they may not be functioning. And what's interesting is one of Howard's good friends, Art, who's a veterinarian, he'll send organs, livers of dead animals, stillborn, and find no detectable manganese in an area that's plenty of manganese supposedly in the soil, but no detectable manganese in the animal because probably the chelation. So, and there, it's like when you pull the minerals out of the food supply, there are hundreds of disorders that are associated with that. And that's just one of the reasons why these diseases may be related.
And a follow-up to that, there's also studies that document that the genetically engineered crops are deficient in their capabilities of taking up certain micronutrients.
Another question. You had your hand up. Did you? Okay, other question? Jeff?
I just, before I make my awful comment, I'd like to commend all of you for the work you've done. I really have a lot of respect for it. It's really, I mean, to do this and get the static you guys get from whatever it is out there is really, takes a lot of nerve, courage. But one question that I have, or I already think I know the answer to, is why is this happening? Is this some haphazard thing that glyphosate suddenly appeared? Is it some haphazard thing that Bayer Pharmaceutical had put out tainted blood products in their Factor 8, killing hemophiliacs for 10 years? I think what we're seeing here, and this is, and you can get on my case or people can throw rotten tomatoes at me, but there's a certain naivety to what I'm hearing here, and that is, and maybe there's legal repercussions, but we're seeing, in my mind, the implementation of a plan. It's not just, it's glyphosate, it's 2,4-D, it's the vaccines, it's the GMOs. This is an part and parcel of an anti-human program, and the doctor did mention or make reference to the Rockefeller Foundation. They are one of the foundations of this evil that we're witnessing, and so I throw it back on me. But that's the question I get from people is like, gosh, this is terrible what you're saying, but why would anybody do this? And the first response is always just for a few bucks, and I think the bottom people are in it for bucks, but the people that are implementing this thing are evil. They know it.
Eugenics.
It's eugenics.
Google
It
eugenics.
started with the Galtons, the Wedgwoods, the Huxleys, and the Darwins in the 1850s.
It started with Plato.
So
Oh,
there's,
yeah, sure, but that's logically.
Let's have Jeffrey respond.
Yeah, okay, I'm shut up.
okay, so you're not the first person that has made this theory, and I don't have any data to support one way or the other. That's all I got.
Okay.
So, all right, you want to call on someone?
Another question. Let's see, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, I just kind of follow, your thought, but for the same thing, I'm very thankful to be around all you experts, and that you have been working so much in this area. But I have one question that only you, the experts, can answer me, probably, or guide me if I'm wrong. For me, personally, this is a human right violation. And we have been talking about, I hear many people talking about many things. But I feel, personally, as a cancer patient, that I am, that my human rights have been violated. And we've been working with the labeling, and all of that, and I wonder if any, because, among attorneys, there are the different areas that they dwell.
So,
Why not the human right and animal rights? From that area.
I can give you two answers to the human right and the animal right. One is I was invited to Germany more than a decade ago by a group who wanted to push the human rights agenda as their way of fighting GMOs. I don't think it had any traction, but that was their angle. Another angle came out in the Ecuador Constitution, where they gave nature rights,
Right,
the
yeah,
rights of
exactly.
nature. And it was interesting that the president wrote in that in case of national security, they could allow GMOs. So the Constitution said no GMOs, but it was up to the president in the case of national security. He was invited to the U.S. by Monsanto, given the full treatment, and then came back and said, I think I made a mistake by promoting the banning of GMOs, and we should make it more available. So Ecuador is in my sights.
Another question.
I'll try to remember mine. So, just trying to counter the industry talk. Something I've heard recently that they're trying to use as an argument, and I know it's fishy, and I already started to do some research, but maybe you have more information, is on the Prop 65 list that Roundup's been placed on now. Our ag commissioner pointed out that aloe vera and golden seal are on the list, and he was using that as a reason to kind of poo-poo the whole thing. I started reading a little bit about it on the way over here, and I found out that they were both declared, put on the list the same year, the same day, the same year, based on 35 comments. And I know we've all done, things where there's been thousands of comments on things in the past, and they don't pay attention. So 35 comments. But I'm just wondering if you know more about that, so I can kind of debunk that whole thing. Have you heard that? And when you look, the whole list, it's all bad stuff. And then there's just those two things that seem kind of innocuous. And I know it's got to be shady, like probably the industry got it on there somehow.
I'm not sure I can answer exactly, if somebody has more information specifically about like why the golden seal was put on the list. If you take enough golden seal, maybe a couple of 1,000 grams, you probably will get some liver damage. I think if you take 1,000 grams if you eat beef, you'll probably have some liver damage. So why that got on there, I imagine it was a ploy. But I can't say. Does anybody have the answer to that question?
Aloe vera was the other one.
Aloe vera,
Aloe vera.
golden seal,
I have an
same
answer
day.
for the aloe vera. It's the whole aloe vera. I wondered the same thing. So when you have the whole aloe vera and there's the gel in between, there's an orange drip in between the outside of the leaf and the gel. So you need to drip that out. That's why that is on there. I wondered the same thing.
The
I
orange,
looked it up.
There you go.
the orange.
Thank you.
The orange
membrane
in
is
between.
toxic?
Yeah, I don't know what it's called. I'm not a
Yeah, no,
scientist.
but it's
I just know
toxic.
it was
But I
on
always
there and I
thought you-
looked it up.
To get on that list, there has to be like peer-reviewed, published research to show that it either causes cancer, reproductive harm. And I'm just wondering, we know how research can be rigged, and it seems like, maybe they only had to show one article and 35 people commented and it gets on the list. But that they're using that to say, well, so these things are on the list, and so it doesn't mean anything that Roundup's on the list.
They say the same thing about coffee being on the probable carcinogen list.
It's coffee.
Well, there's signs all over the place.
I didn't see coffee on there.
We have another question.
Bob, can I
Howard?
give a
Yes,
follow-up to that
sure.
gentleman's? I can't answer your question, but I want to ask you some questions.
Sure.
Do you recognize any of the names in the center of the circle?
The most evil of the names in the center of the circle is not Monsanto. It's
Do you
it's
recognize?
the IG farm Bayer. I work at Bayer.
When you see AstraZeneca, Syngenta,
Oh, yeah. They're.
what do you think of?
I know very little.
Have you ever seen a commercial on TV that says if you can't afford your medication costs, contact us?
I don't watch
commercial's-
television.
That commercial sponsored by
Yeah.
AstraZeneca?
Yeah,
Have you ever heard of atrazine?
absolutely.
One of the oldest herbicides on the market.
Right, that's.
That product is made by AstraZeneca Syngenta. who's
Oh,
also
that was
the number
Syngenta?
4 producer of genetically engineered crops in the world. When you see or hear Bayer, what's the first thing you think of?
Factor 8, because I was
You ever heard
there.
of Bayer Crop Science, the makers
Yeah.
of Aztec insecticide, Liberty herbicide, and genetically engineered crops? When you see Pfizer Pharmacy up, John, what's the first thing you think of? Did you know they were the sole parent company of Monsanto at one point in time?
Were they? Pfizer?
So we've established the fact that all the companies in the center of the circle are in the pharmaceutical and the chemical business. So we're going to start with chemical. Please give me one word that you would use to describe a chemical that you used to kill a weed or an insect, and you're describing that chemical to a 5-year-old child. What one word might you use?
Poison.
Okay, we're using poison to raise crops. What do we raise crops for? Cereal and grain. What do we feed the bulk of the grain to? In the fact that we're using this poison to raise the crop, if there were to be a residual effect, do you think it'd be positive or negative?
Negative.
So if there's an adverse effect in using this poison on the crop that could affect the grain, you feed the grain to the livestock don't feel good, who might you call for help? When the veterinarian comes, what might he suggest you give your animals to make them feel better?
Antibiotics.
What if you want your animals to grow faster? What might you give them? What do we raise livestock for?
Well, I don't eat it, but.
So who eats the meat? So if there's an adverse effect using this poison on the grain that might affect the livestock, is there a chance it could be in the meat, it might affect the people? If the people don't feel good, where do they go for help? After you go to your doctor, where might he send you with a piece of paper with his autograph on it? Does that present a positive cash flow for the companies in the center of the circle?
And that's the house that Jack built.
I know, it's like they all got together and say, hey, we know how to make you really rich.
Another question? And we are getting short on time now, folks.
I have a question about the fact that glyphosate chelates. So it not only chelates the minerals so the plants can take it up, of course it does that with us too. And so I'm wondering, is there a way of testing our blood or our urine to see if we're deficient in manganese and zinc and these minerals? So that would be one way of showing that it actually does have a deleterious effect in terms of treatment for that person as well as for a larger study, right?
Well, only if you knew that the food they ate was lacking in it to begin with.
So regular lab tests, you don't need anything fancy, Quest, LabCorp, whatever, can run your manganese or your zinc levels. They do some, they don't do all of them. They can certainly check them, but the trick is they have to order red blood cell levels and not plasma levels, because plasma is almost uniformly, your blood will do, your body will do everything to keep plasma levels normal. So you have to look at the levels within red blood cells. And so what you do is, and which is something I do, you check it. If it's low, then you make the corrections. You correct the gut. You heal the leaky gut, you rebalance the microbiome, you restore nutrient levels, and then you recheck it, and lo and behold, they restore. But people actually feel better, so you have clinical proof because you feel better, but you can then recheck it and your levels will come up. Your manganese, your zinc, your chromium for your thyroid function, it's all linked. For all those different body functions, you need those minerals to run enzyme systems. They're called metalloenzymes. So for example, I think most of the population now is magnesium deficient. It's a profound issue right now. You can have your doctor run a red blood cell magnesium level. And you just can't throw magnesium. See, that's kind of green pharmacy, just throwing nutrients at yourself. You have to change your diet. And you know, it's very hard to get people to change their diets. Maybe you know that. So, but what people will do is change their diet for their children's diet. So, or their grandchildren for that matter. Be careful with that if you're a grandma or grandpa telling your daughter-in-law what to do. Be careful with that. But yes, and then you recheck and they get better.
Let's have one
Can we
more
get
question.
some studies published that show that?
Well, I don't know if we can get studies published. It would be great to have those studies. I don't have those studies, but integrative practitioners are doing it. But it's not so easy to do human studies, but that's not the hardest study to do, actually. It's not.
Everybody in this room could go and get their doctors to test their blood for the magnesium and zinc, and then we could give it to one of you on the panel, and then maybe you could use that in future publications.
Through Jeffrey's website, we can do the next study.
You gotta do a comparison. It's a little more sophisticated.
It's a little tricky. It's not, yeah.
We have one more question. Let's go back to the cameraman.
So I want to thank you all for your commitment and research. I've learned something new today. I was a little bit shocked to hear that some judges and politicians might get under-the-table payments or work for large companies. I'm shocked, but I'd like to say, and it kind of accentuates what you just said. I've actually been a vegetarian 36 years, and I raised my children completely organic. But when it comes to making change, it really starts within. So even though we're here in the Capitol building and we're trying to bring this to the awareness of legislators and make this more common knowledge and get out to the media, the reality, it starts with our own practice of what we're talking about today on our self-awareness. How many of us heard a few years ago when Taco Bell was serving cattle corn? I mean, I know a lot of people really enjoy fast food restaurants, but I've shied away for a long time. I haven't seen a doctor in over 35 years either. But the point being that it really starts with all of us, and it's hard. It makes time for preparation. It can be a little more expensive, but I want to encourage you all to eat organic and educate your neighborhood. Where I live up in Nevada County, there's big neighborhoods that have all gotten together and refused the spraying of Roundup because it gets into the water tables. And actually, some of the solutions they came up with is they hired teenage kids in the neighborhood for less money than the city was spending on spraying to come out twice a year with lawnmowers and just cut the weeds down and take care of it. So there's a lot of very people-orientated, community-based solutions that we can find. And of course, we have to continue the political pressure, but nonetheless make the changes. Let's not wait. I think that's one of the things that's happening with our country. As much as I love being an American in our country and I've traveled the world, is that we can't wait for someone else to do it. People have to find a peaceful and community-based solution to make the decisions and the choices. And if you want to go to McDonald's or Burger King or Taco Bell or Kentucky Fried Chicken, you know what? Turn and go to Whole Foods, spend a few more dollars, and do the right thing, because it really does affect your quality of life.
Thank
So.
you very much.
Bob,
I just want to remind all of you, what this is all about today is trying to change, trying to bring good change for the better. And one of the ways you can do that, again, is to work with us. One of the things we discovered today, talking with legislators, is that it's going to take a coalition. And it's going to take boots on the ground. It's going to take people like you. So please, if you're not in our organization already, this is how we can put you in touch with all of us. So I'm going to leave these cards here.
How about I add one thing, Bob, before we
Very
close?
quickly, please.
Um,
Oh, I'm sorry, Jeffrey, I didn't know.
I got the hook from the man. Okay. I do think if Howard or Michelle want to also add what to do, I think it's a good point to end on what we can do. We have a little landing page called Non-GMOs Improve Health. And on there you can see the results of that study that I showed with the 3,000 people. There's an interview with me and Michelle about her clinical experience. You can enter information to get a free PDF of my last book, Genetic Roulette, and a video update. So I would suggest that there was a question about we're just preaching to the choir. I like to use the word arming the choir. And it's like that's a web page, Non-GMOs Improve Health, that you can share with everyone, and it's got a easy to read summary of the article on the left side, the detailed 21-page article on the right side in terms of a click. And that's one thing that I'd like to recommend, is that we all use this opportunity to decide what we can do. And before I turn it over to Michelle, who I'm going to suggest plug your book, I'm going to also suggest that our attitude be one of switching from victim to victor.
Yes.
And it's like, some people like to thrive on the fight, but we don't even have to feel like, sure, they're trying to hurt us or whatever, make a buck, but we can completely drop the fight piece too and say, yeah, this is our world, this is what we've inherited, this is what we're going to pass on, and so just choose to bless the world and your life with what you know to be true, bless your friends with that information, and become a victor. That's my message.
Can you repeat the site?
The site is Non-GMOs Improve Health.
Thank you, sir.
I'm blessed with serendipity because my neighbor, Dr. Vincent Adams, and I were hiking, and she agreed 4 years ago to write this book together because I was unable to put my tushy in a chair after working in a clinic all day. And without Vincent, Dr. Adams, incredible skill, curiosity skill. She was a major skeptic initially, and now she is totally on board. But her incredible attention to detail. I'm a kind of a big picture gal, but she honed me in on details that we were able to produce that book. And we are very proud of that book, and it really is, I think, one of a kind, to have the scope of a clinician and the broader picture of a medical anthropologist together who understand the big picture. So that marriage is a beautiful gift. So thank you, Vincent.
What's the name of the book?
It's What's Making Our Children Sick, and we really did a great look into the expose of looking at my patients, but in a way that's both narrow and very broad. And we looked at the bigger food, the politics of food, in a big way. And there's the book, What's Making Our Children
What
Sick,
is it?
by Chelsea Green.
Oh.
So,
But you should look at what's making
we're hopeful that we can get it to every parent, every consumer, every eater out there. That's for eaters. And again, as Jeffrey said, we're doing this in a non-contentious, non-fighting way. This is just sharing information. If I can say one thing to families, it would be I have 3 things that I tell parents when they leave the office is eat organic, drink filtered water, and take your shoes off at the door. And if people can do those 3 things, dust is the most toxic thing you bring into your house, although my husband won't take his freaking shoes off. Other than that, if your families can do those 3 things, there it definitely is for better health. And that's just simply what I tell my families.
There is any chance that your book will be translated to Spanish?
I love that question, and we are talking to our editors to get it translated into Spanish. It's going into Polish. That's the first country. Woo-hoo! Go Poland. But yes, Spanish would be great. We have some connections in Buenos Aires, and we'd love to go down there for a little road trip.
I am from Buenos Aires.
North Korea?
I am from Buenos Aires.
You're from Buenos Aires? We're trying to get there. Because there's so many problems, as you saw in Argentina.
Maybe you can help translate.
So yeah, we're trying to get there.
Just one comment on 2 things. The genetic roulette DVD, it's in the library, Sacramento Library for everybody. But if you could try to get your book into this library system, because a lot of people will look it up and read it in the library system.
And that would be fine. That's on our to-do list.
Could I address that question?
You have to wrap it up.
You can go to your public library, give them the ESPN number, and tell them to order it, because that's what the library is supposed to do.
Good.
They'll
You
do
don't
it.
have to wait for somebody else to do it.
Yeah,
You do it
everybody should
yourself.
do that for their public library.
Yep,
It has to go
that's
in.
right.
Central Library Authority.
Tip of the day.
Name's Rothschild.
I'll just say 2 things. Number 1, buy the book. You won't be sorry. I gave it to my daughters, my daughter-in-law, my mother-in-law, all for Christmas.
All right.
And I noticed something today out in front of the Capitol building at the rally. And the good Lord has blessed me in ways I can't begin to count or imagine or appreciate enough. But you remember when different speakers were asking about health? I could keep my hand down. I have 3 of the most beautiful, healthy grandchildren in our community.
Where do they live?
On the same farm I live on.
Do they eat organic?
Friends of my son and daughter-in-law have children with leukemia, have kidneys removed, are on medication. We have beef, pork, chicken, turkey, lamb, milk, and eggs on our farm. People that get that stuff, we've got a preschool teacher. 60% of the children she has in TK are on medication. It doesn't have to be that way.
No.
And, people look at Michelle's book and, well, they're just not like that around here. Open your eyes, people. Look what's going on around you. So.
Yay. Order the meat from Howard. Order it.
Another round of applause for our panel, please.
discharge thing that wants to,
Am I live?